Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
So we've been talking about ideas about God through Jewish history to help formulate your theology as it affects your davening. And we've been talking about Hasidism, the movement, and mostly we're reading texts from the 1700s and 1800s. And the Hasidim actually had a lot to say about prayer because they were very interested in prayer as a main vehicle for connecting to God. And what we'll see, what I'm going to look at today, I'm going to look at one or two Hasidic ideas, depending on what we have time to get to today. And they are not, strictly speaking, in the flow of our classes about ideas about God. They're just a little bit more about, I'm going to call it the davening process. God gets mentioned, but it's not really about constructing your theology. But I sort of felt like, look, we're talking about Hasidic prayer, and I'd like to be reasonably thorough about some of their big ideas. Okay? So, thing number one we're going to start with today is Hasidic ideas about the letters and words of prayer. If you remember, we talked about a little bit earlier, there were mystics like the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who said that the names of God, the different names of God that we use, whether it's in the Chumash or the Siddur, have different meanings corresponding to different aspects of the God and corresponding to the Sfirot, the 10 divine attributes of God, and that it's very important to have the correct intention when you're reading the names of God in prayer, right? And we said that this was very, very technical, and I showed you a page from the Ari Siddur showing, the intention of you're supposed to have of the different names of God. And we said it was just so complicated, no one could do it, except very few spiritual adepts. And Hasidism kind of, on the one hand, rebelled against that and said, don't worry about that. It's just the thoughts in your heart, the feelings in your heart. On the other hand, Hasidism was left with a residue, I'm going to say, of the idea that the letters of prayer, the letters and the words of prayer have particularly deep meaning. And this goes back to a mystical idea that the Hebrew letters, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, are the building blocks of the universe. So if you look at some early Kabbalistic works, maybe from the 11th, 12th century, they say that God created the universe out of 22 letters, or in some versions, it's 32 symbols, which is 22 letters plus 10 digits, okay? And that these are the individual building blocks of the universe. It's a little bit like a pre-scientific version of elements, right? We say, everything in the universe that looks totally different, whether it's Michael O or the table or the sun, it's all fundamentally made out of the same physical code, which physicists say, oh, it's not even the elements of the periodic table. It's deeper than that. It's just, electrons, protons, neutrons, and whatever they say the subatomic particles are, okay? And those are fundamental building blocks, and depending on how they are rearranged, something ends up being Michael O, and something else ends up being a table. Okay? But it's all just made of electrons and neutrons. At least that's how we learned it in high school physics. I think now it's probably, I don't understand all the stuff about subatomic particles. Meaning they're actually a small number of fundamental building blocks, and all the variety of everything that exists is just based on how you arrange, how those fundamental building blocks are arranged. Everyone follow that idea? We all know that, right? From high school chemistry and physics. Periodic table. Protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, so medieval Hebrew mysticism said the exact, I don't want to say exact same, but analogous idea about the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. They were the fundamental building blocks of the universe. They're a code, okay, an underlying code. And by the way, this is sort of the basis of, everyone gets a kick out of gematria. Gematria means, Aleph equals 1 and Bet equals 2 and Gimel equals 3 and all these fanciful things we see in the Midrash that this word, there are 613 mitzvot, and then there's various things in your tzitzit and the word tzitzit and the strings that adds up to 613, and it's kind of a code. Okay, so when things are when there's an underlying code, sometimes things are interchangeable potentially. And the point of it is that there's a deeper structure that we don't see with the superficial eyes. Everyone follow that, sort of? Okay, so for some of the medieval thinkers, and this runs into Hasidism, the letters are a code. They're the Hebrew letters are a fundamental code of the universe, and sometimes you utter that code without really understanding what you're saying. Sometimes you're able to penetrate more deeply into that. What do the words mean that you're davening? Sometimes it may not matter, because if you are actually, I don't know how to articulate this, uttering the code, but you don't fully understand the code, you're still doing something. The same way, like, I don't know, I turn my car on, I don't understand exactly how it works, yet I am still able to drive, even though I have the dimmest understanding of what is happening under the hood. I have a very superficial understanding of how to manipulate that, even though I'm not an auto mechanic or a car designer. And some people want to understand more deeply. Their inclination is to know what's going on inside the engine. Other people just turn the key on and step on the gas. They're all trying to apprehend the same thing at different levels of depth and sophistication. Okay. Now, I understand that to some people, and I'll show you some passages in Hasidism, and I understand, I want to acknowledge up front that to some people, this is just mumbo jumbo, and to other people, this is deeply meaningful. Okay? I'd like to point out that there are people who come to shul, daven certain words, have no understanding of what those words mean, and find the experience deeply meaningful. Is that a fair statement? Have you ever uttered Hebrew or Aramaic words that you didn't understand or didn't think about the meaning but found them meaningful? If you ever have, raise your hand. I'm raising my hand. Okay? So we've all had that experience. I remember when I was in college and I was interested in different religions, I went to a Zen center and did meditation and chanting, and there was chanting. Some of the stuff with chanting was in Sanskrit. By the way, it was a Korean Zen center, so there's a Korean master who's chanting in Sanskrit. I don't even know if the Korean master understood the Sanskrit. I certainly didn't understand the Sanskrit. We did some chanting in English, chanting in Sanskrit, and we do the chanting, and it's repetitive and has a certain sound to it. It develops a certain meaning, right? And anyone who says Mourner's Kaddish or sings along with Aleinu or says the Shema, I think sort of understands some version of what I mean by that, right? Okay. I want to look at a couple of texts. And if what I just said, if your response is like, I did not understand a word of that, then I would say, okay, that's fair. Okay. Because I'm not sure I understand it either fully. Okay. But for the sake of, we're talking about Hasidism on prayer for these few weeks, and for the sake of kind of full disclosure, I feel like, okay, we ought to try to hear these ideas and think about them, and you'll figure out what it does for you or what it doesn't do for you. So I'll pause for a moment before we look at text. Michael O., I want to call on you.
Well, you said, I guess a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast about, everything is God, or the Hasidim believes everything is God. Some people in the lower, in the upper world, the lower world, they don't have the same understanding. So in a sense, what you're saying is the same thing or similar to what you were saying.
Good. You know what? I think you're gonna take me in a. No, you're not gonna take. I was about to let Michael steer me in a different direction, but I'm not. Okay, I'm gonna stick with. Yes, correct. So if you have again letters, if you have some, I can't tell you exactly how to achieve this. Upper consciousness, higher consciousness, you realize you are uttering letters that are the code, which is, again, I understand that I can't explain this statement. I just want to say it. A code which is the fabric of the universe by means of which God created everything. If you have a higher consciousness, if you have a lower consciousness, whatever that means, I'm just saying words. By the way, and for some people, I'd like to point out, for some people, saying words in a foreign language that they don't understand feels meaningless. For some people, it feels deeply meaningful. Okay. And by the way, for some people, the fact that it's not their daily language of speaking makes it more meaningful, right? You may be aware that at the beginning of the proto-state of Israel, early in the 20th century, there are debates about what should the language of the country be, okay? Because there wasn't really modern Hebrew yet. Hebrew is not a spoken language anymore. And there were people who thought that the language of the country should be Yiddish, because at that point, the majority of the immigrants were from Europe. And there were certainly religious people who said it should not be Hebrew because Hebrew is a sacred language. It's really related to this idea. And you wouldn't use the sacred language to say, if I buy 4 rolls of toilet paper, is it cheaper than if I buy 1 roll of toilet paper 4 times at the store? You wouldn't use a sacred language to talk about that. Order your French fries, fight with your boss, right? The sacred language, the sacred code of the universe should be reserved for only sacred, elevated matters. So there are people who said, like, it should not be Hebrew. Okay. Which is why, by the way, the people who wrote the Talmud, who discussed, let's say they discussed stuff, the stuff they discussed was in Hebrew, but their discussions were in Aramaic, because that's what you talk in an everyday sort of way. You don't talk the holy language in an everyday sort of way. When you're davening, by the way, what did the Hasidim speak? They spoke Yiddish. They still speak Yiddish, right? Okay. There are people in Los Angeles whose first language is Yiddish. All right. Ad hayom hazeh, until this very day. Okay. And the Hasidim spoke Yiddish. By the way, all the Hasidic books, we talked about this last week or the week before. They're all written in Hebrew. They were written down by the disciples. They're all written in Hebrew. But the Rebbe didn't speak in Hebrew. The Rebbe spoke in Yiddish. The disciples, presumably either if it was on Shabbos, they remembered till after Shabbos. It was during the week. Maybe they took notes or they went home, wrote it down. And they did 2 things. They wrote down what the Rebbe said, and they translated into Hebrew, because they knew that if you're writing a sacred book, sacred books need to be in Hebrew. Otherwise, they're not going to be part of the tradition. But they didn't speak these ideas in Hebrew. They spoke all of these ideas in Yiddish, because that's how you talk. But when you're praying, you're using the sacred language because you're doing the code you are articulating the code of the universe. My best analogy is something like the periodic table of elements. That's the closest I can come to it in terms of a modern idea. They're fundamental building blocks, and those who are wise and deep can understand that deeper structure. Other people just, they just turn the key in the car. Okay, some texts. So there's a compilation, edited book called Your Word is Fire, which has various selections from various Hasidic masters. Okay, I'll just read a few passages. The purpose of all prayer is to uplift the words, to return them to their source above, right? Trust me, the Hasidic master knows that above is just a metaphor and that it's not actually in the sky. The world was created by the downward flow of letters, meaning God created created everything in the universe with the elements, how the elements were arranged. So the world was created with forming letters into words. Pause for 1 second. How does the Hasidic master know that? Because how did God, Genesis chapter 1, how did God create the world?
With words.
God spoke, and it was. Okay? So the first act of creation, not forming the human, which is in Genesis chapter 2, but in Bereshit chapter 1, is God speaks, right? So some fundamental core creative, let's call it process, is language. How does God create the universe? Through language. What language? Now, we postmodern people might laugh at the idea like, why would it be Hebrew? Right? Why would we privilege Hebrew? I do not believe this was a question that the Baal Shem Tov asked himself. Why would we privilege Hebrew? I think he took it for granted that it was Hebrew. So the universe was created by the flow of letters. Our task is to form those letters into words and to take them back to God. And if you come to know this dual process, your prayer may be joined to the constant flow of creation. I'm going to skip a couple lines down. The words fly upward and come before God. God turns to look at the ascending word. In other words, God creates everything in the universe out of the code. We are taking elements of the code, and we're not creating a universe, we're creating thoughts, and this comes back up to God. So the elements flow down, and then we flow the elements back up. Here's another passage on the next page. One who reads the words of prayer with great devotion, what Michael said, great devotion means higher consciousness, if you're able to have higher consciousness. One who reads the words of prayer with great devotion may come to see the lights within the letters, even though one does not understand the meaning of the words one speaks. I'm going to read that again. One who reads the words of prayer with great devotion, let's call it higher consciousness, deeper consciousness, may come to see the lights within the letters, even though one does not understand the meaning of the words one speaks. Such prayer has great power. Mistakes in reading are of no importance. A father has a young child whom he greatly loves. Even though the child has hardly learned to speak, his father takes pleasure in listening to his words. So as you well know from many stories that many rabbis have told from many pulpits, the Hasidim were very fond of homespun parables and analogies, right? They talk a lot, by the way, because the ones who wrote these books were male. They very often talk about God the Father and us the Son. So you have to do your own translation of this into contemporary non-gender terms. But I'm just going to stick with this text, right? So, the 2-year-old sits on the father's lap and formulates a sentence. And we've all hopefully experienced some version of this, even if it's not your own biological 2-year-old. And it's charming and full of mistakes and mispronunciations and bad grammar. And the adult, the father says, how beautiful and wonderful is this utterance by my child, right? That's what God is like. You're mumbling, you're getting it wrong. You don't necessarily, by the way, do little children use words that they sometimes don't understand? Absolutely. Okay. And the parent finds it charming and has great love for the child, right? By the way, it's extra, many of us have experienced, it's an extra special kick when a little child uses a word that they've heard that they don't understand, right? That's like, makes us laugh and take pleasure even more. Oh my God, the Yingala said this giant word that they don't understand, that they can't pronounce, right? So for the Hasidim, that's like us in prayer. right? Now notice, by the way, we're shifting here from understanding the letters and the words to devotion, right? And they toggle back and forth. Is it that you need to understand the letters and understand what you're doing? Or that actually doesn't really matter. What matters is great devotion. And we'll see it goes back and forth. They go back and forth on this. Okay. Like in this passage on the 3rd page, do not think that the words of prayer as you say them, I'm going to slow down. Do not think that the words of prayer as you say them go up to God. It is not the words themselves that ascend. It is rather the burning desire of your heart that rises like smoke toward heaven. If your prayer consists only of words and letters and does not contain your heart's desire, how can it rise up to God? So everyone think of the story that, rabbis don't tell anymore on the high holidays because they told it too much about, the unlettered shepherd who only says the Aleph Bet, right? What's the point of that? What's the point of that parable? That the shepherd recites the Aleph Bet because the shepherd doesn't know how to pray proper words. They're uttered with devotion. God accepts them as prayer. But I want to add as a corollary to this, it's because they are a code and God knows how to arrange those letters. It's not because it was random. It's because they were uttered with feeling, and there's a level of feeling and there's a manifest level of letters, and God knows how to arrange the letters of that code. Does that make sense? Okay. So there is both something, I guess what I want to say here, it is both, I might have to stop here. I might read one more passage. It is both metaphysical, meaning some mystical idea that this is the code which formulates the fabric of the universe. God used it to create the universe. We are then rearranging those sounds to communicate back to God. That's metaphysical, okay? As I understand the word metaphysical. And on some other, I'm going to call it paradoxical level, it doesn't matter if the child goes blah, 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 blah. The parent finds it charming and interprets what the child means. It doesn't matter if the child got the code correctly, right? What matters is the heart or spirit behind the letters. I'm just going to share one passage from the Baal Shem Tov because it's a famous one. Okay. Pause for 1 second. There's a book called the Torah Commentary of the Baal Shem Tov. Like most Hasidic books, it was not written by the Baal Shem Tov. It was written several generations later, compiled from various books where people said, my master, the Baal Shem Tov, said, or my master's master said that the Baal Shem Tov said, and they're all arranged according to the Torah portion, so to make a Torah commentary. And in Parshat Noach, there is a large interruption, which is a whole mini book, which you can actually purchase this book now, translated into English with footnotes. And it is called Amud HaTfilah, which means the pillar of prayer. And it is basically the Baal Shem Tov's, or attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, right, by 2nd or 3rd generation Hasidim, view of prayer. You can buy it on Amazon. And this is how Amud HaTfilah actually starts in Parshat Noach. This is based on the line in the commandment to Noah, okay, to build an ark. The Hebrew is Sohar Ta'aseh Lateva, which we usually translate as make a window for the ark. The word for ark is Teva, Tevat Noach, and Sohar means a window or illumination. Like the Hebrew word Soharayim, which means noon, because it's like everything is most illuminated in the middle of the day. Okay? So Tzohar means a window, but it also means illumination. And Teva, which means ark or box, Okay. In Rabbinic Hebrew also means word. It means word. Right? So the Baal Shem Tov says what the sentence to Noah, the commandment from God, Sohar ta'aseh teva, make a window for the ark, really means on a deeper level is make illumination from your word. Okay? And this is actually the launching point for many, many passages in this work, The Pillar of Prayer, about the words and the letters. Okay? So the Baal Shem Tov says, Hasidim say, this is the basis for this idea. Your words, okay, so the word that one utters in Torah study or prayer be illuminated. The Baal Shem Tov says when you're studying Torah or prayer, there's later Hasidim who say it's much easier to do this in prayer than in Torah study, because in Torah study, you're breaking your brain on trying to understand. These two things in the Talmud, they argue with each other. How do they fit together? So you invest a lot of intellectual energy and understanding. Therefore, it's actually much harder in Torah study to try to achieve this. It's much easier in prayer because they assume that you pray regularly. The words are more familiar and you're expending less intellectual effort and understanding. You said Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad twice a day for many years, many decades. You understand what the words mean. Therefore, it's easier for you to penetrate more deeply into what they mean, right? As opposed to you're studying some Torah passage. Okay, I want to see Baal Shem Tov if I want to see anything else in the Baal Shem Tov. I don't understand what this means, but I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to read it because it's there. 112 here on the next page. The practice and prayer and study, Lishma, for its own sake, according to a book, the Chesed L'Avram, consists in drawing the spiritual qualities of the divine attributes together with the infinite light into the letters, and following this, drawing oneself and one's thought into the inner spirit of the letters. Connect yourself to the bare letters and draw the life energy from above into these letters. I can't tell you I know what that means. Okay? I just put this before you. Here's another one on the next page, 114. The letters are merely vessels and garments, and one needs to draw into them without pronouncing them. The spiritual effluence, which I believe is a fancy word for outflow, of the divine attributes and the presence of the infinite one who gives life to all things. So you're drawing something into the letters, and the letters are vessels and garments, meaning they are a physical dressing, garment, of something spiritual. I just want to add with one last one about the kiss, 115. One may cleave to God, may God's name be blessed, through the letters of Torah and prayer. It is by connecting your thoughts and your inner experiential dimension to the inner spiritual realm of the letters. According to the secret meaning of the verse in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Yishakeni minashikot pihu. In Song of Songs, it's like the woman talking to the man. It's seen as an allegory for the humans talking to God. Let God kiss me with the kisses of God's mouth. What happens when you kiss? Let your breath cleave to the divine breath. When two humans kiss, their breaths mingle. It's a metaphor or an allegory for when you kiss God, it's as if God's words are articulated through the letters, are coming down to you, and you are rearranging them and giving them back to God. Prayer is you receive God's kiss and you give it back. Okay, I said a lot of things. I'm going to allow 2 to 3 minutes for question and comment. And you might say, by the way, I don't mind, take from this what you will. And again, some people say, like Zen. I read these Zen koans and I don't understand what the heck they're talking about. And other people say like, oh my God, this is so deep and so profound. Okay. Michael.
Two things. Number one, I never knew that the power of echolalia, a child says, could be so spiritual. And number two.
Wait, pause. But again, before you get to number two, because number one is about the use of the reason that the sages in the Midrash or the Hasidim use a parable is because they want to, I think, among other things, they want to use a feeling that is intuitively familiar to you that I don't have to explain to you. Okay. Right. Michael's blessed, right? You have grandchildren, right? So surely you've had the experience of a grandchild babbling on your lap, and it probably filled your heart with love, I'm guessing, right? So it's like everyone intuitively grasps that on a human emotional level. And the purpose of the parable or allegory or whatever you want to call it is to say, yeah, that's exactly what it's like for God when you're davening. In other words, it's using an easily graspable experience that we can all understand to explain something that's less obvious to understand. Sorry for interrupting you, Michael. I just wanted to make clear that's kind of how they're using this. Yeah, of course we understand that. Yeah, and then they're saying, yeah, that familiar thing, that's exactly what it's like when you're davening. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No. And also, going back to Kol Tefillah a few weeks ago at Beth Am, the idea of using nigun, music, and also even art.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes, and for people who use music, they might say, and using music without the words, a nigun, drills down even on a deeper level to what you might emotionally experience and be trying to communicate. Okay. And of course, there are artists who say, if you read songwriters, they say, where does the music come from? They say, I don't know. It came to me, right there. If you read interviews with songwriters, it's interesting. They craft, and they'll say, no, it came to me. The story, the song came to me. I don't know where it comes from. Okay. So you can understand how some people say music is just giving it back on a deeper level with the letters stripped away, because you could argue that for a lot of people, the letters just get in the way. It's a more primordial way. It's a little bit, and this is a bad analogy, as if I said, oh, no, I'm not going to see elements on the periodic table. I'm just going to see electrons. It's all just electrons. Okay. I don't know if that was a dumb analogy or a good analogy. All right. Other comment. Michael, did you get to the second thing? Second thing.
Yeah, that was it.
That was it. Yeah. The music.
The music, and the nigun, and
Yeah. Other thoughts? Carl, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Carl. Carl, then Larry.
I'm wondering about, is there a tension here between what you say or chant? Do you need to at all know the right words? Is there any role for set prayers here being more effective or less effective? Or we all just chant Om?
So, right.
Work the same?
So the answer, I think, is yes, there is a tension. By the way, back to the Mishnah, there's a tension between keva and kavanah. There's a tension between fixed daily prayer and spontaneous prayer, right? And the Mishnah and the Talmud explains what that means is, actually the Mishnah says this, that on the one hand, there are certain things you have to say. You're supposed to say the Shema every day, twice a day. You're supposed to say these letters. Okay. You're supposed to say the 19 blessings of the Amidah. Baruch atah Hashem chonein hada'at. It's a requirement. I'm putting in air quotes. I shouldn't put it in air quotes, right? The Mishnah of the Talmud says it's a requirement. On the other hand, if there's nothing spontaneous and fresh in your prayer every day, you haven't done it right. It's not real prayer. So my point just being, yes, there is a tension, and this goes back. And if you were to ask the Baal Shem Tov, if he were standing here, by the way, does anyone know what's the part of prayer that you're actually supposed to pronounce every word and letter correctly according to the halakha. It's the Shema. It's the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. And although you're allowed to say the Shema in any language, in whatever language you say it in, you're supposed to pronounce all the words and letters correctly. Meaning you're not supposed to be mumbling. That is not the halakha, by the way, for the Amida. Okay? But the Shema, you are supposed to, air quotes, in the halakha says you're supposed to say every letter correctly. So, Carl, yes, it is intention. On the one hand, there's a halakha that you're supposed to say every word and letter correctly. On the other hand, when the child sits on the parent's lap and babbles semi-coherently, the parent is filled with great love. They're both true. So, the whole definition of a paradox is, well, I can't tell you, or attention, not a paradox. Attention is, I can't tell you how they fit together, Carl. They're in tension with each other, right? And in tension with each other means they are both very important. Yes, there's certain things a Jew is supposed to say. Yes, the shepherd says, God, I'm just saying the Aleph Bet, and you know how to arrange the letters better than I do. Those things are in tension with each other.
Thank you.
I mean, one could say a lot more about that, obviously, but I just want to leave it as the starting point is, yes, both and they are in tension. Yeah. Okay, Larry Diane, and then we'll wrap up.
Not sure which of the 20 things I want to say.
I know. So you gotta narrow it down.
Yeah. I'll try to be very quick.
Yeah.
Well, on the last point you're making, and the point you're making, to me, there's a huge distinction between talking about prayer and all of its manifestations and its impact on us, the prayer givers.
Yeah.
Versus any whatever you want to call it, mystical, supernatural power that it might have toward God. So I simply want to, I think it's important to separate those two. Okay. Secondly, I'm saying babbling.
Hold on. I just want to comment on that. I just want to say then maybe one idea we touched on today is the effect on you should be the same as the effect on your grandchild sitting on your lap who babbles, who knows that they feel embraced and loved. Okay, so maybe, I know for Hasidic thought, one of the feelings you're supposed to have in prayer is that you are embraced and loved and connected to God, regardless of how perfectly or imperfectly you babble. This gets back to, God is everywhere, because God is everywhere means that you're embraced and that you feel the divine kiss going both ways. So I just want to comment that although that doesn't exactly say that in any of the passages we read today, that is a corollary of what we read today.
Right.
Go ahead.
I fully understand. I think I understand the way you mean it. I'm going to say only one thing. I'm going to relate really quickly a story, because we just got back, as some of you know, from the Jazz Cruise, which is our religious experience of the year. And I don't know if anybody knows the name Bill Charlap. He's the dean of jazz pianists in the world. An amazing person. You should all go and listen to him. He gave a solo concert on the cruise.
Yes.
And it's a piano concert. So at times he would actually talk to us about the lyrics of the songs, but it's all piano. And Bill Charlap at one point by the end of the concert, he had everyone in the crowd in tears, just playing the piano. Who of you have not listened to music, whether it's jazz or classical or I don't know what it is, that hasn't been at some point, without even listening to the lyrics, moved to tears because the music reaches you? And afterwards, we had some conversations with him, and Diane asked him, because he played this amazing rendition of Over the Rainbow, and he ended it very darkly. And there was a discussion about it, which I won't give the discussion right now, which is very interesting. And Diane asked him, is that what you intended? That this was a reference to the impending Holocaust, because Harold Arlen wrote it in 1939. And basically what he said to her was, if that's what you take out of it, then that's what I meant. In other words, whatever he put into it You take something out of it and it's your own. I'm not going to say anything more, but to me, listening to music not only can be, is a religious experience, even apart from music in my religious practice. That's all.
Okay. I'm going to end with that thought. Thank you, everyone. Oh, wait, Michael? I guess I'm not going to end with that thought.
Yeah. When we were talking about the ark and the window,
yeah,
I went through a stream of consciousness that went like this, and I have no idea. It's not a fully formed idea. But when we got to talking about words and illumination, it occurred to me that maybe what was being said is that words are a window or an illumination of the soul. And from that, I immediately thought of the Chafetz Chaim and wondered whether this was something that influenced his interest in and writings about Lashon Hara.
So I'll just say like a sentence or two about that, not about the Chafetz Chaim, because when they're talking about words, that's the concrete ism. A deeper way of understanding that is language, right? And just to take a step back, big picture, language, which we think distinguishes us from all other creatures, even though nowadays we say, okay, maybe dolphins and whales have language also, okay. But you know, sort of on a deep medieval philosophy, language is what separates us humans from everything else in the world, and is one of the interpretations of what B'Tselem Elohim means. God created humanity in God's image. One of the interpretations of that is language. So it connects to God creating the universe with language. And what the Chafetz Chaim was very concerned about, bad speech, wrote about, was, again, it's connected in the sense of how you use language, right? Language is potentially a vehicle to the divine, right? Language is kind of one of the most abstract things we do. Although we might say, based on what Larry just said, maybe music is more, melody is more abstract. I'm not going to get into that, okay? It's just different uses of sound. Is it language, right? Is it melody, right? But because language is a vehicle to something higher consciousness, deeper consciousness, however you want to phrase it, how we choose to use language has significance. And when you use your human power of speech to wound or trash someone else, you have used a thing which could and should connect you to the divine. You've used it to be cruel to another human being. Let's kind of put it that way, right? And therefore, you have misused that's, again, I'm putting it all together, misused the Tselem Elohim, right? The image of God that has been given to you, right? So you can connect it to all that. Again, because right, we're talking about words, we're talking about sounds, we're talking about language, depending on, what your little story is, it could be all of those things. Remember, by the way, besides the shepherd who only knows the alphabet, there's the other shepherd story who says, I don't know how to pray, but God, if you had sheep, I would take care of them for free, right? That's the highest prayer. Or the kid who only knows how to, right? They come into shul and they blow the whistle, right? That's all they do. It's the sound. And it's in that Hasidic parable, it's more profound, deeper, and opening of the heavens than any particular combination of words and letters. Gotta stop. Have a great day. Stay healthy. Be Torah. Pray for world peace. And God willing, we'll meet again next week.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.